Absalalo Makudiri. The time is 5 minutes past 8 Central African time, and we're going to be turning our attention to a rapidly evolving global flashpoint. The United States of America, according to reports, has moved to extend its fragile ceasefire with Iran just hours before its expiry date, buying a bit of time for stalled diplomacy, but also at the same time raising very, very fresh questions about whether talks will materialize in Islamabad. We expected to have a round or second round of the ceasefire talks in Pakistan this week, but that didn't happen, and we all wait with bated breath to see if it will become a reality. The United States of America is insisting that negotiations are still within reach, but Iran is seemingly pushing back, accusing the US of acting in bad faith and refusing to engage under pressure, especially with that naval blockade in the Strait of Hormuz on both sides currently being closed. So it's going to be a really, really interesting conversation to unpack, especially the legal, humanitarian, and the geopolitical stakes that are currently on board here and that need dissection. And we're going to be doing that with Osaka-based international human rights and humanitarian lawyer, Professor Saul Takahashi, who's joining us via our StreamYard platform. Doc, thank you so much for joining us. Really, really appreciate you giving us your time, and thank you so much for joining us once again. Good morning. Professor Takahashi,
Yes,
can you hear me? Yes,
I
yes,
can
yes.
hear you
Thank you
now.
so
Yes, I'm sorry. I think we might have cut off for a second. Sorry about that.
No, no worries at all. Thank you so much for joining us. And I think we'll jump straight into it. Just your reaction of the last few hours reports that the United States of America has ultimately extended the ceasefire and waiting to see whether or not there's going to be any peace talks as we were expecting this week.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think what we're witnessing is Donald Trump desperately trying to find a way out of the hole that he has really dug himself into. I mean, he's desperately looking for a way out. The fact of the matter is that he was tricked into this war by Netanyahu and the Israelis, and he realizes that. I mean, he realizes he looks stupid and he is a loser. I mean, he realizes that, and so he's desperately trying to find a way that he can somehow come out of this with a win. And a lot of commentators are talking about how he can, trying to find a way of being able to spin, a face-saving way to, spin it as a win, declare victory, and go home and spin it to the American people as a win. And I think that's also important. But more than that, it's just at a very sort of fundamental animal level, he doesn't want to be a loser. And this is, that's why he's getting more and more deranged and more unhinged, because he is a loser. This has been, from the American perspective, a complete catastrophe. They haven't achieved any of their goals, and they are not going to achieve any of their goals, or certainly not the majority of them. Iran is the winner here, and that's clear to all who are watching. So he's desperately trying to find a way out, and I certainly hope that there is some kind of way out for the sake of us all.
No, most definitely. I want to come back to the extension of the ceasefire. The US says they've essentially extended the ceasefire to allow space for diplomacy, but Iran is arguing that the ongoing blockades amount to an act of war, and I think they're referencing what we saw this past weekend, the Iranian vessel, the Tosca, if I'm not mistaken, where it was intercepted and ultimately captured by the US. Do you believe negotiations can meaningfully happen under those conditions, where you have a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz by the United States of America, you have these interceptions and the hijacking essentially of vessels in the Strait of Hormuz?
I mean, I really don't see how they can. And once again, we get back to Donald Trump having dug himself into a hole. He's painted himself into a corner. If he backs down from this blockade, and of course it is an act of war, there's no question of that. I mean, I
Mm,
think we're a little bit late in the day to be talking about acts of war because obviously they've been bombing, Tehran and other cities, targeting civilian areas, violating every single law of war that you can imagine. So, obviously they are in, there is a war going on. They are engaged in an armed conflict. There's no question about that. So the blockade is just an extension. It's not like all of a sudden we're in a state of war. I mean, they've been doing this since the 28th of February. But, the point is he's politically, he's insisted on this blockade. He himself seemingly just doesn't understand that in any kind of serious negotiation, you actually need to show some kind of modicum of respect to the other side. It seems
mm,
that throughout his entire adult life, the only thing he's ever learned how to do is bully people, intimidate people, and force them into subjugation. And he thinks that's going to work with Iran. Well, it's not going to work. I mean, clearly it hasn't worked, and it's not going to work. So he doesn't know what to do, and he's painted himself into a corner by, constantly insisting on this blockade and saying we're not going to let go, we're not going to let it up. And obviously, the Iranians, time is on their side, at least so they believe. And they're insisting that the blockade be at least taken down or alleviated for negotiations to start. So we're really stuck in this conundrum. It is a it
mm,
is a difficult it's a difficult situation. But from the Iranian perspective, how can you blame them? I mean, the Americans have not negotiated in good faith. Twice now in the middle of negotiations, they have attacked Iran. So from the Iranian perspective, frankly, I'm amazed that they are even negotiating at all.
mm,
There is no good faith on the part of the United States, and you know, this conflict someday, inshallah, will come to an end, and somehow there will be some kind of resolution. But this lack of good faith, this lack of any kind of respect for principles of decency. This is the kind of thing that the rest of the world is seeing, and this is going to cause untold damage to the standing of the United States, in the future. And it's not just about Donald Trump, unfortunately, for the United
mm,
States, and the rest of us that have to live in the world that is still dominated in many ways by the Americans. The thing is, Donald Trump obviously is unhinged. Donald Trump obviously, he has no business being anywhere near any kind of position of responsibility. He should be, he should be fired immediately. But even supposing he is gone, there are plenty more to take his place. Almost 80 million Americans thought Donald Trump was the right man for the job. We have to
mm,
understand that. And even supposing, I don't know who it could be, but even supposing a different president, from the Democrats or whatever comes in and he's more reasonable and he treats allies with respect, and it's a more kind of traditional post-war presidency. Who's to say what's going to happen 4 years down the line? That's the kind of that's the kind of thing that the other leaders of the world are thinking right now. That's the
mm.
process that we're going through. Hey, the Americans, they're just not reliable anymore. We can't rely on them to be, stable, sane partners anymore. So, so this is really, going to bring about a very dramatic shift, I think, in the international order.
No, most definitely, and it's interesting that touching a bit on internal American politics. The midterms are a major talking point. The conversations around that are starting to bubble a little bit. How much of a factor is this war in Iran's going to be on the midterms, if at all? And could Trump possibly face implications from what you're gathering on the ground in America?
Well, from the perspective of the American voters, yeah, I mean, the implications are huge, of course. And obviously, we're still only in April, so there's still a ways to go. If if there's a resolution, a satisfactory resolution at like right now, and petrol prices start to go down again in the United States, inflation starts to abate, then probably, maybe the effects on the midterm elections and people's voting patterns won't be that much. But the longer this lasts, the more people are going to get angry and the more people are going to abandon Trump, I believe. I don't necessarily think that is the main motivating factor behind Trump getting desperate, though. I mean, I think at a very sort of rudimentary animal level, he sort of understands that if things go south in the midterm elections for the Republicans, life will be a little bit more difficult for him. But we're talking about a guy who thinks nothing about elections. He doesn't care. I mean, he's, there is a very good chance that, there could be a very severe breakdown in civil order in the United States after the midterm elections, or definitely after 2028, because, there's a good chance that the Democrats will sweep the 2026 midterms, and Trump and his cronies will just say, well, there was fraud. They'll make something up. They'll make something, they'll come up with some kind of bogus emergency, and they'll try to just ignore it. I mean, 2028, I think there's a bigger chance of that happening then rather than in 2026, but it's still a possibility. I think more than that, it's just that Trump doesn't want to be a loser. I mean, it comes down to this very, not even adolescent, very sort of toddler level psychology. He doesn't want to be a loser. And that's why he's getting desperate and, running around and having tantrums and, sending social media posts late into the night. That's what I think is happening. So it's a very dangerous situation. I mean, we're talking about somebody who's really getting unhinged here.
Most definitely, and I think it's very, very interesting that you talk about him not wanting to be a loser, while the lines between what is winning and what is losing are also so blurred. You don't essentially know what he wants at this point. I want to take a quick break. When we come back, I want to focus on Iran's position here, because at least from my perspective, it has surprised a lot of people, especially the Americans, on how steadfast they have been so far and how they are not even willing to come to the negotiating table, something that you'd expect a country that has lost almost 3,000 people and has infrastructure decimated would be doing at a whim, but they're not doing that. And I want to focus on that after the short break, Prof. If you can indulge and just stay with us for a moment.
Sure.
There we go.
It's a wonder how kids get anything done these days. With all the distractions, when do they even get time to study? As a mother, all I can really do is make sure they have all they need to perform at their best. That's why I choose to include Sunfoil, triple refined pure sunflower oil with every meal I make. Naturally cholesterol-free and approved by the Heart and Stroke Foundation as part of a balanced eating plan. So whether I'm cooking, frying, or baking, I know every dish will be a wholesome one. Sunfoil, now we're cooking.
When disaster strikes, families lose everything in an instant. Homes destroyed, communities displaced. Hope fades into uncertainty. Our Global Emergency Fund ensures we respond without delay, delivering food, water, shelter, and healthcare to families in need. To support our Global Emergency Fund, visit islamicrelief.org.za.
Discover the Africa of your dreams and surround yourself with her spectacular beauty. Relax beneath her serene sunsets and explore wildlife at its natural best. It's where the pride of Africa comes together. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve. Get to know the Big Five or cruise on an elephant safari game drive. Interact with lion and tiger cubs and enjoy world-class halal cuisine while we pamper you during your 5-star stay. Indulge in the true African experience. For reservations, call now on 042-203-1400 or visit kwantu.co.za. The Kwantu Private Game Reserve, the place of gathering.
Rejuvenating media day by day. This is Salam Media.
Welcome back. You're still tuned in to News and Views. Myself, Salailo Makwidiri. The time is 19 minutes past 8 Central African time. And we're still having a really, really interesting conversation. Still focusing on the US-Israeli war on Iran. The latest being the United States of America saying, well, they'll be extending the ceasefire agreement, hoping that it'll give some leeway, some time for diplomatic negotiations, ceasefire talks to ultimately happen. The expectation was round 2 of those talks were going to be taking place this week in Islamabad, Pakistan, but that doesn't look to be a reality. And it looks like Iran, they are the ones that are essentially saying, the talks won't happen because they believe and feel the United States of America is not negotiating in good faith, and they won't be negotiating at all under the current conditions. The hijacking, piracy essentially by the United States of America on the Strait of Hormuz, the Tuska this past weekend, an Iranian vessel being taken over, being hijacked by the US Navy, and the blockade on the Strait of Hormuz being, I think, the key points right now that are blocking the negotiations, ceasefire negotiations to happen. And Prof, thank you so much for staying with us. If you just joined us, we're still in conversation with Professor Saul Takahashi from Osaka. He's a human rights and humanitarian lawyer, and we're having a really, really wonderful discussion unpacking this new turn of events. And the one thing that really, really has struck a lot of people, Prof, is the fact that Iran is not buckling under pressure. There are more than 3,000 people that have been killed thus far, and infrastructure is being decimated. From your point of view, the posture taken by Iran right now, not buckling under pressure, saying we won't negotiate at all if the situation remains like this, if there's still a blockade, if we still have vessels that are being intercepted and hijacked by the US Navy. What do you make of them? Because any other country are in a war with the United States of America, in fear of what we've been seeing happening in other parts of the world, would rush and run to the negotiating table.
Well, maybe other countries, maybe, maybe not. But certainly the Iranian Sea, they're not, the Iranian Sea that they have the advantage, the Iranian Sea that Donald Trump is desperate to get some kind of deal. And also they have to show that they're not, they have to show that they're not buckling under pressure. Like you mentioned, the Americans, they believe, and I strongly believe as well, the Americans have not. It's clearly not negotiated in good faith up till now. Twice already, the Americans have attacked during negotiations. So there is no good faith. So the Iranians are, obviously they're worried that if they give an inch, then Donald Trump is going to try to take a mile. That's how Donald Trump always operates. That's how he's been trying to operate with them up till now. And so they're not going to play that game anymore. They believe they have the advantage. And frankly, I think they're right. For the Iranians, this is the existential battle. I mean, really, the Americans are bombing them, saying that they want to impose regime change. So this is it. This is where they've got to pull all the stops and really go full throttle here. At certain points up till now, I've also wondered if they haven't been overplaying their hand a little bit, but so far they've been pretty successful. So, we have to see, will they be able to, push Trump into alleviating this blockade and in some way, shape, or form, maybe not through public announcements, but, through some kind of actual alleviation, on the ground. Maybe that's what will happen. We'll have to see. But, really it's Trump and the Americans that are desperate to get out of this, not the Iranians. It's very similar to, the situation on the ground, of course, is different, but there are a lot of similarities with, the Israeli genocide in Gaza. All Hamas had to do was survive, and it did. It passed this test with flying colors. I mean, it is still in charge in the territories of Gaza that the Israelis have not taken over again. Throughout the genocide, they proved themselves completely capable of fighting, not only of fighting back, but coordinating these very complicated, releases of prisoners and prisoner exchanges. They could do it. They survived. They passed this with flying colors, and the Iranians are doing the same. The Iranians don't have to beat the Americans as such. They just have to survive. So this is, that's already a win for them. And how many of these of their points? I think they had a 10-point list of demands, but how many of these points are really red lines for them, and how many they're willing to give way on? That's something we'll have to see. That's what negotiations are. Both sides come with a sort of maximum list of demands, and then they try to thrash it out. And I think that's what has to happen. That's the kind of thing that Donald Trump just doesn't understand. I mean, he thinks, once again, you bully people, you push them around, you intimidate them, you threaten them, you bomb them, you use violence, and then they capitulate to you. And he thinks that's what negotiations are. That's what it means. This is not negotiation. This is just aggression. So he's got to now he's in the world of grown-ups now, and he's got to understand that. I certainly hope that he learns this, because he's got to learn it fast. The other thing, though, is what are the Israelis going to do? How are the Israelis going to try to sabotage this? Because there's no question that's what I mean. They have been doing this ever since the initial ceasefire. They've been bombing Lebanon to kingdom come. They've been taking over territory. They've been doing this left and right. So they've been trying to sabotage this. They've been doing their best. And they, and also the Israeli lobby within the United States, they're going to do their utmost to try to throw a spanner into the works. And I very much hope that Trump is able to resist that, and to to not only come to a decent, serious deal with Iran, which he actually abides by. That's also saying another thing, but that also he forces the Israelis to abide by. That would be, I think, the best outcome.
I want to chat briefly about what could happen next if talks fail to materialize, and this second round of a ceasefire essentially also goes, without yielding any kind of progress when it comes to negotiations. How quickly could the situation deteriorate back into open conflict? Is that still a reality, given the military buildup in the region?
Well, that's kind of hard to say. I mean, I personally kind of doubt it. I think, what we're heading towards is sort of a war of attrition, if you like. I mean, I've heard commentators use the phrase sort of frozen conflict, where everything sort of stays like it is now. And that is a possibility. And maybe that's something that the Americans will want to do, because probably they believe that they maintain this blockade on Iran, then sooner or later the Iranians are going to have to give in. Sooner or later, they're just going to run out of funds. They're going to run out of money. I don't think that's going to happen anytime soon. But maybe some in the hallways of DC, maybe that's what some people are planning. I don't really know. I kind of doubt that the Iranians would go back to lobbing missiles into the neighboring countries of the Gulf. Just because they don't need to escalate it. I mean, it's not necessarily advantageous for them, though they might, at this point, though they might make a different, they might come to a different decision later on. It's kind of hard to say. I don't think. I mean, it's hard to see a ground invasion of Iranian territory by the Americans. It's just hard to envision that. People talk about this great military buildup of the Americans, in the Gulf, right around the Strait and around Iran. But when you think of the task that this would be, invading Iran, there's nowhere near enough troops or enough weaponry to do that kind of thing. They could take one of these islands and maybe try to hold that, but then what's the point? You leave your troops exposed to missile fire coming from Iran. That's not going to work either. So again, I would never underestimate the impetuous and incompetent nature of Trump's decision making on these kind of things, But I'm sure that's what his his generals are telling him. I certainly hope that's what they're telling him. I don't think it's. I just at this point I don't think that it's in anybody's interest to really go down the escalation route. So let's hope that cooler minds prevail sooner rather than later.
No, most definitely, Professor Takahashi. Appreciate your time as always, and your very, very wonderful insights on the story as it continues to develop under very intense global scrutiny. Everyone is looking at it because it's affecting everyone. Unlike, as you mentioned, in Gaza, what we saw there, it wasn't, not everyone could feel the effects, but this time around, I think it's unraveling for everyone. Doesn't matter which part of the globe you're in, you'll feel the impacts of it. And I'm sure we'll chat again soon as it continues to unravel. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Thank you.
Really appreciate your time there.
Yeah, thanks very much.
Osaka-based international human rights and humanitarian lawyer, Professor Saul Takahashi, giving us, I think, wonderful insights on the ongoing US-Israeli war on Iran and the announcement of a ceasefire. It'll be interesting to see if the ceasefire holds, and most importantly, if it will yield any kind of progress when it comes to peace talks, essentially. Or are we going to see a situation which could be a frozen conflict, as Professor Takahashi mentioned, where things just remain as they are, and there's just tensions that are simmering and brewing between the US and Iran, a Cold War type of scenario, or we could go back to full-scale, full-blown out conflict. But that situation seems quite unlikely. But with Donald Trump at the helm, nothing seems improbable anymore. So wait with bated breath, and we'll continue to give you the latest right here on Salam Media. Otherwise, going to take a quick break. We'll be back with you after this.